So this is a report for the first QoE-Net training event that we had in Nice in France. And my report is basically going to be me talking about the expectations I had and the experiences I've made during that week. And when I say experiences, I mean mostly learning experiences, because after all, it was supposed to be a learning event for all of us. But when I say learning, I don't necessarily mean learning how to give a presentation or how to write a paper, because that's something I already learned before. But for me, it was mostly about learning how to get to know a group of people in such a small amount of time, especially people with such a diverse background and so many different previous experiences. The other thing I learned was thinking about what it means to be a PhD student and researcher, because that's something I never really thought about before all these years that I've been doing it. And I think there were a couple of nice lectures and discussions we had about what it actually means and why we think it's such a given that we will do our PhD, and if that's something we really want to do. And for me, it always has been clear, but there are certain aspects that you may not always think about, and it was good to reflect on these things during last week. So we had a few tutorials during that week, we had lectures, and I just want to briefly go through all of them, or most of them, and talk about what I personally learned from them. The first lecture was about planoptic imaging. It was given by Fernando Pereira, who is certainly a very well-known person in the QoE domain, and he has a very specific presentation style. And what I learned most about during this lecture was to understand what planoptic imaging actually is, because it's something that I heard about before, but I never really understood the idea completely. And he presented it in such a way that it was understandable for me what it actually means. He also explained different image and video coding techniques for stereoscopic and multi-view video, and the challenges that occur when you try to have 100 different views and transmit them over one channel, and how you actually represent this in a video codec. And finally, he talked about how important it is to be visionary about things like planoptic imaging when it comes to applications and how you represent this kind of data in codecs. Fernando also gave another lecture the other day, which was about being a researcher in academia and what that means, and especially which kind of attributes are required for a researcher and what kind of things you want to be good at to become a good researcher. And I don't know, it was maybe 20 different dimensions where you could be good at. Some of them not really orthogonal, but where it was clear that you couldn't really be good at everything, but you should at least try to master all of these things. For example, being a very honest person, being timely, being precise, being technically accurate, different things. And I think it was a very positive and optimistic talk, because it encouraged people to think about their strengths in the first place, and then maybe also to think about how they can improve aspects where they are not so good at. Another thing that I found very interesting was how he said that you should never expect to have a reward now, but any of the things you do may be rewarded to you much, much later in time, which could even be 10 or 20 years from now. So it always pays off to wait a little for your rewards, especially if you're a researcher. So what I took from that lecture was, for me personally, trying to be a little more technically accurate, being more knowledgeable about the principles, and especially the mathematical principles underlying some of the things that I talk about and research into. And the other thing was trying at least to be more visionary about the future, trying to be a bit more forward-looking, inventive. And I know it's not a thing that you can force, but it's a thing where you can at least try and be a little more open-minded. The second QoE-Net lecture was given by Anna Ukanova, and she talked about what it means to have a network of people and how this network can help you build future paths for your career. She talked a little about how she ended up at Google, which was not something she had planned, but something that just happened due to coincidence, but also because she wasn't afraid to ask questions. So the one thing I learned was you should never be afraid to approach another researcher and ask your questions. For example, after a conference talk or at some social event. So the worst thing that can happen to you is that you never get an answer, but the best thing that can happen to you is that you will have a nice discussion, and maybe you get to learn somebody even closer, and they will again open up an opportunity for you to follow another path if you decide to do that in the future. Our third lecture was given by Andrew Perkis, and he presented his ideas about immersive media technology experiences and how technology can help create new multimedia experiences, and how these experiences can actually be transmitted through the technology we have. So how can technology act as an enabler for future multimedia? And it was very funny to see different art projects the group made, trying to be a little more thinking outside of the box of what you could typically label as multimedia. I think the challenge will be to actually find a suitable storytelling method for some technologies we don't really know much about. And that could even be 3D, because you don't want to make a 3D movie just for the sake of it being 3D. You want to be able to leverage that technology. And the same thing goes for, say, a 360-degree movie, or a movie with haptic elements, or whatever you want to imagine for the future. The fourth lecture was given by Turaj Ibrahimi, and I think that was personally one of the most interesting ones, because he shed some light onto the dark side of being a PhD, which means that you really have to invest literally thousands of hours into doing something very, very special. But you have to try not to become a specialist who knows everything about nothing. And you also, of course, should not be a generalist who knows nothing about everything, but try to be a versatilist who knows pretty much about a lot of things. And I think this is the ultimate goal, of course. You don't want to be stuck in some very specific niche of a research topic where you can say everything about, but nobody will really care. And so it really made me take a step back and think about, do I really want this, and which direction do I want to go? Do I want to make applied research, or would I rather research into the fundamentals? And during all that time, we actually had to write a paper. So we'd been given an assignment a week before, which was a pretty short amount of time. We were basically given the title, and then we were supposed to write a table of contents for that paper. And during the week, come up with the first final draft of that paper. In our case, it was QE monitoring, a topic that I know a bit about because I've worked in Deutsche Telekom for a year now. So I know some of the things that ISPs are doing in that regard, the challenges they're facing, and the discussions that are currently going on. And that was really helpful, because we could direct our paper from being just a simple review paper to a more discussion-oriented and challenge-oriented contribution. I think the most challenging aspect for us was the teamwork itself. I never worked with Peter before, I never worked with Aslan before. It seemed to me that Peter already had quite a lot of experience writing papers, whereas it was a bit more difficult for Aslan. But I think that we came up with a really good first draft after just maybe 2 afternoons of really writing on the paper. And the team experience itself was a good way to learn about how to communicate, how to delegate tasks, how to coordinate, so that a paper actually looks like it was written in one piece and not just by 3 people and then stuck together in the end. And finally, there was presentation day, which I usually like, because I like to be on stage and I like to present things. And I was lucky enough to be able to talk about topics that I was already quite knowledgeable about, which made it easier to explain some of the concepts behind that, especially because I've been working at T-Labs, and I could tell a little more about ISP problems and discussions that we had in standardization meetings. And again, it was a group presentation, and making it was fun. It was pretty easy. We just stuck together some slides and then went through it, rehearsed it once, and we basically shared a few ideas in the group, and then we just did the presentation. And I think it went quite well. And during all of that, we had really great social experiences. So I got to learn to know the other PhD students within that really small amount of time by just going out for dinner, talking about our problems, about our previous experiences, and what we were working on. I also discussed with AFSA, for example, about a joint paper that we could write in the future. So the workshop was really stimulating collaborations, and I'm very much looking forward to that in the future. Yeah, and then it was time to leave Nice again sooner than expected, because it really didn't feel like a whole week of work. The next group meeting is going to be in Trondheim in February next year, which is still quite a long time to go, but I hope I will see some of the members of the group before that again.